You know your marriage is ending when your wife starts leaving fertility clinic brochures on your nightstand like room service menus. Not subtle hints about starting a family, actual medical pamphlets with highlighted sections about genetic optimization and superior donor selection. My name is Miles Carter, and I'm a 40-year-old civil engineer who thought he'd built a solid life. Turns out I was working with faulty blueprints from day one. It started 6 months ago when Jocelyn began her nightly ritual of scrolling through her ex-husband's Instagram while lying next to me in bed. Blake Hargrove, former Olympic rower, current fitness influencer, and apparently the genetic goldmine my wife had foolishly abandoned for a steady paycheck named Miles. "Look at those shoulders," she'd murmur, showing me photos of Blake's latest workout videos. "Perfect bone density. Did you know he has a resting heart rate of 42? I'd grunt non-committally and return to my engineering journals, calculating load-bearing capacities while my wife calculated the load-bearing capacity of her regrets. The Pacific Northwest rain drummed against our bedroom windows as Jocelyn continued her genetic audit of our relationship. Our house, a modest 2-story I'd designed myself, suddenly felt like a prison constructed from my own mediocrity. "Miles, we need to talk about children," she announced one Tuesday evening, sliding another IVF brochure across our dinner table like a legal document. I looked up from my meatloaf, the same recipe my mother had taught me, which Jocelyn now criticized as too heavy for optimal fertility nutrition. "What's to discuss? We've been trying for 2 years. "That's exactly the problem." She tapped the brochure with her manicured nail. "We're not optimizing our approach. Blake still has samples stored at the Pacific Fertility Center from when we were married." The fork stopped halfway to my mouth. "Excuse me?" "Think about it logically, Miles. You're an engineer. If you needed the strongest materials for a project, wouldn't you source the best available?" I set down my fork carefully, the way you'd handle unstable explosives. "Are you comparing our potential child to a construction project?" "I'm being practical. Blake's genetic profile is exceptional. Olympic-level cardiovascular system, perfect muscle fiber composition, superior cognitive processing speed." "How do you know his cognitive processing speed?" She waved dismissively. "He posts about his meditation and reaction time training. The point is, we have access to premium genetic material. It would be irresponsible not to consider it." That night, I lay awake listening to Jocelyn's breathing and the rain against the windows, feeling like a man who'd just discovered termites in his foundation. The structural integrity of everything I'd built was compromised, and I needed to decide whether to renovate or demolish. Over the following weeks, Jocelyn's campaign intensified. She invited her friend Tony over for wine nights that turned into strategic planning sessions about upgrading the Carter bloodline. I'd catch fragments of conversation from my home office. "Miles is sweet, but let's be honest. Blake's genetics are superior in every measurable way. Have you seen Blake's latest sponsorship deal with that protein company? Clearly his physical attributes have commercial value. I mean, if I'm going to be pregnant for 9 months, shouldn't I optimize the outcome?" I started keeping what I mentally called a betrayal spreadsheet, documenting every slight, every comparison, every casual dismissal of my genetic worthiness. Engineers love data, and the data was painting a clear picture of my wife's priorities. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening when our neighbor Riley joined one of their wine sessions. I was in my office, supposedly reviewing blueprints, but actually listening to their conversation through the thin wall. "So you're really going to do it?" Riley asked, her voice pitched with gossip-hungry excitement. "The paperwork is already prepared," Jocelyn replied. "I just need Miles to sign the consent forms." "What if he refuses?" "He won't. Miles is logical. Once I explain the genetic advantages, he'll understand it's the smart choice." "And Blake's okay with this?" "Blake thinks it's hilarious. He always said Miles was just a placeholder until I came to my senses." I sat in my office chair, staring at the structural engineering diploma on my wall, feeling like I'd been hit by a wrecking ball. My wife hadn't just decided I was genetically inferior. She'd been planning this betrayal with the enthusiasm of someone designing their dream home. That weekend, while Jocelyn attended a pharmaceutical conference, I conducted my own investigation. A quick search through her laptop revealed email exchanges with Blake that made my stomach turn. They'd been in contact for months, discussing not just the IVF plan, but their mutual amusement at my obliviousness. Miles is so focused on his little building projects, he hasn't noticed I'm planning a renovation of my own, read one particularly cutting message. Blake's response, "Poor guy, still thinks he's building something permanent with you." But the real discovery came when I found the legal documents hidden in her jewelry box. Consent forms for embryo transfer, medical authorizations, and financial agreements, all with my signature already forged in Jocelyn's careful handwriting. She wasn't planning to ask my permission. She was planning to steal it. I photographed everything, uploaded the files to a secure cloud account, and began making calls. The first was to my sister Nina, a family law attorney who'd never liked Jocelyn. "She forged your signature on medical consent forms?" Nina's voice crackled with professional outrage. "Miles, that's fraud, criminal fraud." "I'm not interested in sending her to prison. I want something more comprehensive." "What do you mean?" "I want to build a trap so perfect she'll demolish herself trying to escape it." Nina was quiet for a moment. "Do you remember that post-nuptial agreement I made you guys sign after your second anniversary? The one Jocelyn thought was just a romantic gesture?" I smiled for the first time in weeks. "The one with the infidelity clauses? And the biological indemnity provisions. If she pursues genetic material outside the marriage, she forfeits all claims to marital assets. She signed it because she thought it was protecting her from any affairs I might have." Exactly. She never imagined she'd be the one triggering the clause. We spent the next hour reviewing the legal framework I'd unknowingly constructed years ago. The post-nuptial agreement was ironclad, notarized, and specifically designed to protect against exactly what Jocelyn was planning. Over the following 2 weeks, I quietly secured our assets. Joint accounts were legally frozen pending the biological indemnity investigation. Valuable items were moved to a safety deposit box in my name only. I documented every piece of evidence, every forged signature, every betraying email. Jocelyn returned from her conference glowing with excitement about her genetic optimization project. She'd apparently spent the weekend finalizing details with Blake, who was eager to contribute his superior DNA to what he called the Carter upgrade. The final confrontation came on a rainy Tuesday evening, exactly 1 month after her initial proposal. Jocelyn had prepared an elaborate dinner, clearly planning to present her fait accompli with romantic flourishes. "Miles, I've made a decision about our family planning," she began, sliding the forged consent forms across the table with a confident smile. I looked down at the documents bearing my falsified signature, then back at her expectant face. "That's quite a request. I know it's unconventional, but you'll understand once you see the genetic analysis Blake provided. Our children will have every possible advantage." I nodded slowly, reached into my briefcase, and slid a thick manila envelope across the table. "Here's mine." Jocelyn's smile faltered as she opened the envelope and found copies of her emails with Blake, photographs of the forged documents, and a legal notice of annulment based on fraud and violation of the biological indemnity clause. Her face went white as she read the financial implications. By pursuing Blake's genetic material, she'd legally forfeited all claims to our house, my retirement accounts, and even the furniture we'd purchased together. "This can't be legal," she whispered. "Check page 12. Your signature, properly notarized, agreeing to exactly these terms." She frantically flipped through the documents, her confident facade crumbling like a poorly designed foundation under stress. "Miles, we can work this out. I was just exploring options. The same way you explored forging my signature? The same way you explored coordinating with Blake behind my back for months? Jocelyn stared at the papers, finally understanding that her genetic optimization project had optimized her right out of a home, a marriage, and a financial future. The next morning, Jocelyn woke up in what was no longer her house, married to a man who was no longer her husband, with access to bank accounts that were no longer hers. The biological indemnity clause had triggered automatically upon her documented pursuit of external genetic material, and my sister Nina had filed the annulment papers before dawn. I made coffee in my kitchen, emphasis on my, and watched Jocelyn stumble downstairs in her silk pajamas, looking like someone who'd just discovered their dream home was built on a sinkhole. "Miles, surely we can discuss this rationally," she began, attempting to restore her pharmaceutical sales representative composure. "We are discussing it rationally. You wanted Blake's superior genetics. The legal documents you signed give you exactly what you wanted, and nothing else." She opened the refrigerator, then stopped. "Did you remove my name from the mortgage?" "I never added it. This house was purchased before our marriage with my inheritance. You have no legal claim to it." Jocelyn's face cycled through several expressions as she processed the implications. She'd spent 5 years living in a house she'd never owned, married to a man whose assets she'd never been entitled to, protected only by a post-nuptial agreement she'd now violated. "What about my things?" "Your personal belongings are packed in boxes by the front door. Everything else, furniture, appliances, household items, was purchased with my income and remains my property." I handed her a cup of coffee in a travel mug. "You might want to call Blake. I'm sure he'll be thrilled to support the mother of his future genetic legacy." Jocelyn's hands shook as she dialed Blake's number. I didn't need to hear both sides of the conversation to understand Blake's response. His enthusiasm for genetic contribution apparently didn't extend to financial responsibility. "He says this isn't what we discussed," she reported, her voice hollow. "I imagine not. Blake was expecting to provide genetic material to a woman with assets and stability, not a homeless ex-wife seeking child support for a child that doesn't exist yet." Over the next few days, I watched Jocelyn's carefully constructed life collapse with the systematic precision of a controlled demolition. Her friends, the same ones who'd enthusiastically supported her genetic optimization project, suddenly became unavailable when she needed places to stay. Tony, her closest collaborator, was particularly brutal in her abandonment. "Jocelyn, I supported your decision when you had resources and a plan, but this is just messy. I can't have that kind of drama in my life." Riley, our gossipy neighbor, proved equally fair weather. "I thought you had everything figured out. If you can't manage your own situation, how can I trust your judgment about anything else?" The pharmaceutical company where Jocelyn worked was less diplomatic. When Nina forwarded them evidence of Jocelyn's fraudulent document preparation, a skill she'd apparently developed through her familiarity with medical paperwork, they terminated her immediately. Fraud, even personal fraud, violated their ethics policies. Blake, meanwhile, was dealing with his own reputation management crisis. Word of his involvement in the genetic optimization scheme had reached his sponsors and social media followers. The fitness influencer market, it turned out, didn't respond well to men who abandoned the mothers of their potential children. Blake Hargrove, biological contributor or absent father, read one particularly damaging blog post that mysteriously appeared on several fitness websites. I may have had some involvement in that blog post. Engineers are surprisingly good at anonymous content distribution when properly motivated. My best friend Derek, a security consultant with a talent for creative problem solving, helped coordinate what we called Operation Genetic Consequences. Nothing illegal, nothing dangerous, just ensuring that everyone involved in the conspiracy faced appropriate natural consequences for their choices. "You know what I love about this?" Derek said as we monitored Blake's rapidly declining social media engagement. "They did this to themselves. We're just amplifying the existing structural weaknesses. Blake's Instagram follower count dropped by 30% in a week. His protein powder sponsorship was terminated. His online fitness program subscriptions plummeted as women realized he was the type of man who'd abandon his genetic responsibilities. But the real masterpiece was Jocelyn's growing desperation. With no job, no home, and no financial resources, she was forced to confront the practical implications of her genetic optimization project. She showed up at my office on Thursday afternoon, looking like someone who'd been living in her car, which, it turned out, she had been. "Miles, I made a mistake. Can we please talk about reconciliation?" I looked up from my blueprints for a new shopping center, noting how different she looked without professional makeup and expensive clothes. "What would you like to discuss?" "I was wrong about the genetic thing. You're a good man, and you'd be a wonderful father to our children. Our biological children." "That's very kind of you to say. Unfortunately, our marriage was annulled due to your documented fraud. You're no longer my wife, and I'm no longer your husband. But we could remarry. Start fresh." I set down my pencil and gave her my full attention. "Jocelyn, you spent months planning to steal my genetic autonomy, forge my signature on medical documents, and replace me with your ex-husband's reproductive material. Why would I want to rebuild a relationship with someone who views me as genetically inferior?" I was confused. "Blake manipulated me. Blake manipulated you into forging my signature? Blake manipulated you into calling me a genetic placeholder? Blake manipulated you into describing our potential marriage as a renovation project?" She had no answer for that. "Here's what's going to happen," I continued. "You're going to leave my office, drive away in your car, which incidentally is still in your name and your financial responsibility, and figure out how to build a life that doesn't involve defrauding people who trust you. Where am I supposed to go?" "I'd suggest calling Blake. After all, he has those superior genetics you were so excited about. Maybe he can use his exceptional cognitive processing speed to solve your housing crisis." Jocelyn left my office in tears, but I felt no satisfaction in her suffering. This wasn't about cruelty, it was about consequences. She'd made calculated decisions based on her assessment of my worth, and now she was experiencing the calculated results of those decisions. That evening, Derek called with an update on Blake's situation. "Your boy Blake is having a rough week, lost another sponsorship today. Apparently, the supplement company doesn't want to be associated with genetic irresponsibility. Also, 3 women have come forward claiming he promised them exclusive access to his premium genetic material in exchange for financial support. He was running a genetic Ponzi scheme? Looks that way. Turns out superior genetics don't automatically include superior ethics." I hung up the phone and poured myself a glass of wine, a good bottle I'd been saving for a special occasion. Watching my wife's genetic optimization project optimize her into homelessness seemed special enough. 2 weeks after Jocelyn's office visit, I received a call from Nina with news that made me smile for the first time since this whole genetic nightmare began. "Blake's been served with a paternity suit," she reported with barely contained glee. "Apparently one of those women Derek mentioned has a 2-year-old son and genetic testing that proves Blake is the father. I thought Blake was too genetically superior to make that kind of mistake. Turns out superior genetics don't include superior birth control. The woman is seeking back child support, future support, and damages for Blake's abandonment. His premium genetic material is about to become very expensive." This development created what engineers call a cascading failure in Blake's life structure. His remaining sponsors dropped him immediately. Being an absent father was even worse for his brand than being a genetic opportunist. His social media accounts, once showcasing his physical superiority, became comment sections full of angry women sharing stories about his reproductive irresponsibility. But the real entertainment came when Jocelyn learned about Blake's paternity situation. She showed up at his apartment, a luxury high-rise she'd been hoping to move into, and found him packing boxes. Derek had positioned himself in the coffee shop across the street with a telephoto lens, documenting the confrontation for what he called historical accuracy. You should have seen her face when Blake told her he couldn't support her genetic project because he was already paying child support, Derek reported later. She went full pharmaceutical sales rep on him, pointing, gesturing, probably calculating his quarterly genetic output versus his financial liabilities. Blake, it turned out, had never intended to actually support Jocelyn or any resulting children. His enthusiasm for genetic contribution was purely ego-driven. The reality of financial responsibility for his superior offspring was something he'd never considered. He basically told her that genetic superiority doesn't include financial stupidity, Derek continued. Then he suggested she find someone else to fund her optimization project. Jocelyn's response, according to Derek's lip-reading skills, included several pharmaceutical terms used in non-pharmaceutical contexts. With Blake eliminating himself from her genetic optimization project, Jocelyn was left with no home, no job, no husband, and no genetically superior backup plan. She'd optimized herself right into complete destitution. But Jocelyn wasn't finished. She'd spent years in pharmaceutical sales, which apparently taught her that rejection was just the first step in a longer negotiation process. She began calling my friends, my colleagues, even my mother, explaining that I'd abandoned her due to fertility disagreements. Her version of events painted me as a controlling husband who'd refused to consider modern family planning options. My mother, bless her engineering-trained heart, listened to Jocelyn's sob story and then asked one simple question. Did you forge his signature on medical documents? Well, technically yes, but then he was right to divorce you. Don't call here again. My colleagues at the engineering firm were equally unimpressed. Professional engineers understand the importance of documentation and authorization. Forging signatures on legal documents isn't a fertility disagreement, it's fraud. But Jocelyn's most ambitious attempt at reputation rehabilitation came when she contacted the local newspaper with her story about a heartless husband who abandoned his wife for wanting children. The reporter, a young woman named Sarah Chen, initially seemed sympathetic to Jocelyn's narrative, until Nina provided her with copies of the forged documents, the email exchanges with Blake, and the legal timeline of events. Mrs. Carter, Sarah said during their recorded interview, you're describing this as an abandonment, but the documents show you plan to use another man's genetic material without your husband's knowledge or consent. How is that a fertility disagreement? I was trying to optimize our family planning by forging his signature on medical consent forms. The technicalities aren't important. The important thing is that Miles refused to consider what was best for our potential children. What was best for your potential children was having a father who didn't commit fraud to conceive them. The interview never ran as a story, but Sarah did write a piece about the legal complexities of reproductive fraud that used Jocelyn's case as an anonymous example. It became required reading in several family law courses. Meanwhile, Blake's life continued its spectacular collapse. The paternity suit expanded when 2 more women came forward with genetic evidence of his superior reproductive irresponsibility. His luxury apartment was repossessed, his car was impounded for unpaid tickets, and his social media accounts were suspended after he posted angry rants about genetic gold diggers. The man who'd mocked me as a genetic placeholder was now living in his mother's basement, working at a big box store, and paying child support to multiple women who'd believed his promises about exclusive access to his premium DNA. Derek and I celebrated this development at our favorite bar, toasting the poetic justice of Blake's genetic superiority, leading directly to his financial inferiority. You know what the beautiful part is? Derek said, raising his beer. They did this to themselves. Every single consequence was the direct result of their own choices. It's like watching a building collapse because someone removed all the load-bearing walls, I agreed. Structurally inevitable. But our celebration was interrupted by a familiar voice from across the bar. Miles! Thank God you're here. Jocelyn approached our table looking desperate and slightly drunk. She'd apparently been drowning her genetic optimization sorrows in wine and bad decisions. Jocelyn, I thought you'd moved on to your next optimization project. Blake turned out to be a disappointment. Multiple child support payments, legal troubles, financial instability. Clearly not the genetic investment I thought he was. Derek nearly choked on his beer. Genetic investment? I've been thinking, she continued, ignoring Derek's incredulous expression. Maybe genetic optimization isn't about finding superior material. Maybe it's about optimizing the environment and partnership. I stared at her, amazed by her ability to reframe her complete life collapse as a learning experience. Are you suggesting we reconcile? I'm suggesting we were good together before I got distracted by Blake's genetic profile. You're stable, reliable, financially responsible, genetically adequate? Well, yes. Adequate can be optimized through environmental factors, proper nutrition, educational advantages. Derek stood up abruptly. I'm going to get another beer before I say something that gets us thrown out of here. I watched him walk away, then turned back to Jocelyn. Let me make sure I understand. Blake's superior genetics turned out to include superior financial irresponsibility, so now you want to return to my adequate genetics because they come with superior financial stability? When you put it like that, it sounds calculated. It sounds calculated because it is calculated. You're not apologizing for viewing me as genetically inferior. You're just recalculating my market value based on new data about Blake's liabilities. Jocelyn's pharmaceutical sales training kicked in. Miles, we're both adults. We can approach this rationally. I made some mistakes, but we can learn from them and build something better. What exactly are you offering to build? A partnership based on realistic assessment of genetic and financial resources, optimized for stable child rearing and long-term security. I looked at this woman who'd once been my wife, now pitching our potential reconciliation like a business proposal, and felt something that wasn't quite pity and wasn't quite amusement. Jocelyn, you're describing a merger, not a marriage. What's the difference? And that question, asked with complete sincerity, told me everything I needed to know about why our marriage had failed and why any reconciliation would be doomed. The difference, I said, standing up and putting money on the table, is that mergers are based on calculated advantage. Marriages are supposed to be based on love. Love is just optimized compatibility. No, it's not. And that's why you'll never understand what you lost. I left her sitting at the table, probably calculating the cost-benefit analysis of her genetic optimization project and wondering where her spreadsheet had gone wrong. 3 months after Jocelyn's barroom reconciliation pitch, I received an invitation that made me laugh out loud. Blake Hargrove was getting married to one of the women seeking child support from him. According to the wedding announcement, Blake had found true love with Jessica Morrison, a successful attorney who appreciates his commitment to family and genetic excellence. Derek immediately recognized this as a strategic marriage designed to consolidate Blake's child support obligations and provide him with legal representation. She's probably getting a bulk discount on his premium genetics, he observed. But the real surprise came when I discovered that Jocelyn had been invited to the wedding. Apparently, Blake and Jessica viewed her as a cautionary tale they wanted to display at their celebration, a living example of what happens when you don't properly secure your genetic investments. I had no intention of attending, but Derek convinced me that witnessing Blake's latest attempt at optimization would provide valuable closure to our own genetic drama. Besides, he argued, you need to see how this story ends. It's like watching the final episode of a really twisted reality show. The wedding was held at a budget hotel conference room. Blake's reduced circumstances apparently didn't support the luxury venue his genetic superiority might have once commanded. The guest list was small and consisted mainly of Jessica's legal colleagues and a few of Blake's remaining fitness industry contacts. Jocelyn sat alone in the back row, looking like someone attending a funeral for her own dreams. She dressed professionally, but I could see the strain of her reduced circumstances in the discount store accessories and slightly worn shoes. Blake, meanwhile, had clearly been coached by his attorney bride on appropriate wedding behavior. Gone were the arrogant displays of genetic superiority, replaced by humble gratitude for Jessica's willingness to blend their families and optimize their legal situation. During the ceremony, Blake's vows included a promise to honor Jessica's investment in our genetic future and provide stable support for all our combined offspring. It was possibly the least romantic wedding speech I'd ever heard. Jessica's vows were even more businesslike. Blake, I promise to manage our family's legal and financial obligations with the same dedication I bring to my practice, ensuring optimal outcomes for all parties involved. Derek leaned over and whispered, "They're literally incorporating their marriage. This is beautiful." After the ceremony, Blake approached Jocelyn with his new wife in tow. I positioned myself close enough to hear their conversation while pretending to examine the discount wedding cake. "Jocelyn, I'm glad you could make it," Blake said with the forced enthusiasm of someone following his attorney's script. "Jessica and I wanted you to see how genetic optimization works when it's properly structured." Jessica smiled with professional courtesy. "Blake has told me about your previous arrangement. I think you'll find our approach more sustainable." Jocelyn's pharmaceutical sales training had clearly prepared her for this type of professional humiliation. "Congratulations. I hope your genetic project succeeds where mine failed." "The difference," Jessica explained, "is comprehensive planning. Blake's genetic contribution is just one component of our family optimization strategy. We've also structured financial obligations, legal protections, and long-term stability measures." "You've incorporated your reproduction," Jocelyn observed. "Exactly. Emotion-driven genetic decisions lead to the kind of complications you experienced with Miles. We're approaching this as a business partnership with reproductive benefits." Blake nodded enthusiastically. "Jessica helped me understand that genetic superiority without financial planning is just expensive DNA." I watched Jocelyn process this information, seeing her realize that Blake and Jessica had solved the optimization problem that had destroyed her marriage by eliminating love entirely from the equation. "What about Miles?" Blake asked, apparently unable to resist one final dig. "Has he found someone who appreciates his adequate genetic profile?" Before Jocelyn could answer, I stepped forward. "Actually, Blake, I've been focusing on a different kind of optimization project." Blake turned, clearly surprised to see me. "Miles, I didn't know you were invited." Derek thought I should see how the genetic superiority story ended. Jessica studied me with professional interest. "You're the husband who used legal documentation to protect your assets. Impressive foresight." "Thank you. I've always believed in proper structural planning." Blake attempted his old condescending smile. "So what's this optimization project you mentioned?" "I'm building a new house. Custom design, superior materials, optimized for long-term stability and appreciation. No structural compromises, no faulty foundations, no genetic complications." "Sounds lonely," Jocelyn said quietly. "Sounds peaceful," I corrected. "Amazing how much you can accomplish when you're not constantly calculating genetic market values." Blake's new wife laughed, a genuine sound that suggested she found our entire genetic drama amusing. "Blake told me you were bitter about the divorce, but you seem remarkably well-adjusted." "Why would I be bitter? Jocelyn got exactly what she wanted, freedom to pursue genetic optimization. I got exactly what I wanted, freedom from someone who viewed our marriage as a biological compromise." Derek appeared at my elbow with 2 pieces of wedding cake. "This is fascinating. It's like watching the sequel to a disaster movie where everyone learned the wrong lessons from the original disaster." Jessica raised her champagne glass. "To genetic optimization and legal protection." Blake raised his glass. "To superior planning and financial stability." Jocelyn raised her water glass. To learning from expensive mistakes. Derek raised his beer. To watching other people's genetic drama from a safe distance. I raised my glass and looked around at this collection of people who'd turned reproduction into a business strategy. To building something real instead of optimizing something fake. We drank our toast, and I realized this was exactly the closure I needed. Blake and Jessica deserved each other, two people who'd found love through liability management. Jocelyn had learned that genetic optimization without financial planning was just expensive fantasy, and I had learned that sometimes the best revenge is simply building a better life. As Derek and I left the wedding, I felt the satisfaction of an engineer who'd successfully completed a complex project. All the structural problems had been identified, all the faulty materials had been removed, and the foundation was now solid enough to support whatever I wanted to build next. "You know what the best part of this whole thing is?" Derek said as we walked to our car. "What's that?" 6 months ago, Jocelyn thought she was upgrading from your adequate genetics to Blake's superior genetics. Now Blake's married to a lawyer who treats reproduction like a corporate merger, and you're free to find someone who actually loves you instead of tolerating your DNA. You think that's the best part? No. The best part is that Blake's superior genetics are now locked into a legal contract with someone who's probably already calculating the cost-benefit analysis of his reproductive output. I laughed, realizing Derek was right. Blake's genetic superiority had led him into a marriage that was essentially a biological business partnership. His premium DNA was now managed by someone who viewed it as a legal asset rather than a romantic gift. Meanwhile, Jocelyn's genetic optimization project had taught her that superior genetics without superior character were just expensive disappointment. She'd optimized herself right out of a marriage with someone who actually cared about her, in pursuit of genetic material from someone who viewed her as a reproductive liability. And I had learned that sometimes the most superior choice is refusing to compete in genetic markets altogether. 6 months later, I finished construction on my new house, a custom design that incorporated everything I'd learned about proper foundations, structural integrity, and long-term stability. It was built for one person initially, but designed to accommodate expansion if the right partner came along. Someone who would appreciate the craftsmanship rather than calculate the genetic implications. Jocelyn sent me a housewarming card with a note. "Congratulations on your beautiful home. I hope you find someone who appreciates what you've built." It was the first communication from her that didn't include genetic analysis or optimization strategies. Maybe she'd finally learned that some things can't be improved through superior planning. They can only be destroyed by it. Derek helped me christen the new house with a barbecue that included all our friends and colleagues, people who valued character over chromosomes, loyalty over genetic profiles, and authentic relationships over optimized partnerships. As I stood on my custom-designed deck, looking out at the Pacific Northwest mountains and listening to my friends' laughter, I realized that Jocelyn had actually done me a tremendous favor. Her genetic optimization project had optimized me right out of a relationship with someone who never truly valued what I offered. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying someone's life. It's building a better life without them. Blake and Jessica's marriage lasted exactly 18 months before she filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences in genetic expectations and financial responsibility. Apparently, Blake's superior genetics came with inferior money management skills that even legal optimization couldn't fix. Jocelyn eventually found work at a different pharmaceutical company and, according to mutual friends, stopped discussing genetic optimization entirely. Her dating profile, Derek reported with glee, emphasized emotional compatibility and shared values, with no mention of athletic achievements or cardiovascular superiority. And I found someone who loved my house, appreciated my engineering skills, and never once asked about my genetic profile or reproductive optimization potential. Sarah was a landscape architect who understood that the best foundations are built on mutual respect rather than biological calculations. When Sarah and I got married 2 years later, Derek gave a toast that perfectly captured the lesson of my genetic optimization experience. To Miles and Sarah, proof that the most superior choice is choosing someone who chooses you back, without calculating the genetic return on investment. As I looked around our wedding reception, held in the garden Sarah had designed around my custom house, I realized that Jocelyn's betrayal had led me to exactly where I needed to be. Not because of some grand plan or